What are the ways we set an example for others? You've heard the expression, you got to set the example, you got to lead by example, but a lot of us just interpret that to mean what appearance only. But what you need to understand is setting a good example isn't just about working hard, showing up on time, or dressing nicely, although those things are important. You want to think about your example in terms of what people learn about how to do their job by watching you do your job. Because people are always watching you when you're in charge. And there's an expression we used to use in the Marine Corps, there's no idle talk when you're a leader. The littlest thing is observed. What you react to, what you avoid, how you interact with certain people, what gets rewarded, what gets excused, all those things are noticed. And in this video, we'll talk about the subtle examples that you set and why it's important to realize you're setting them in the first place. Hi, I'm Mike Targus, retired Marine, founder of Center Desk Leadership Coaching. I served 21 years in the Marine Corps as an infantry officer and retired in 2013 and transitioned into project management, engineering, and sales. I've been leading teams on that side ever since. So I've seen both sides, military and civilian, and I know some things that'll help you be a better leader, and that's what this channel is about. So if you're interested in being a better leader, helping others become better leaders, this is for you. Let's start out by looking at this leadership system we're developing. Leadership is really broken down into three elements: the chaotic environment, uncertainty, and how we build trust and why that's important. Very little about people is predictable. So there's your chaotic environment. And there's more to it than that, but it's short version. And then our default decision-making environment is one of uncertainty. Whereas if you think about it, we're always trying to create certainty. And you can locally, but ultimately we as leaders, we got to be ready to decide without all the facts. And then building trust, which is what it's all about for you to make yourself as a trusted leader in an organization. So let's dive in on building trust, because that's what the example part of this video is predominantly about. Building trust is broken down into reasons that we follow people, gaining and maintaining respect, and then what's our moral obligation. It's not just a matter of our position. We owe our people certain things that are inherent with being their leader. In this video, how you set an example brings in elements of all of these. Let's start out with appearances, because appearances are important, and they're also the easiest to understand as something a leader can improve on fairly quickly. Showing up on time, working hard, prepared, paying attention to your appearance, these things matter. They set, though, the baseline. Those are the minimums of the expectation of the people on your team. And it's safe to say that people are not going to exceed that example that you set in those areas. But it really just is the baseline. I mean, the price of admission for a leader. But the example we're going to talk about today is a deeper example. So the routine things that I just talked about and the routine work, those are just entrusted to your people to handle. I mean, to be involved, you have to supervise. But we're talking about some of the deeper aspects of leadership that you want to show people personally how you want them done with your example. Another way of saying that might be you assume or you expect people to be reliable. You want to show them what it's like to be dependable. And dependable is a lot more about your character, integrity being one of them. Can people trust what you say and do for the right reasons? The first example we're going to talk about is how you handle uncertain situations or uncertainty in general. This is probably the most basic unspoken requirement of people for their leaders, is that they are comfortable dealing with uncertainty, because the people doing the work may not be, probably aren't. In fact, that's why you're there. You put somebody in charge as the leader to make sure you can get through those kind of situations. And something you probably noticed is that when things are going well or as expected, people really don't need the leader. You don't need somebody around telling you what to do. But as soon as there's a change where there's like conflicting direction and people get themselves into a situation where they're at risk personally or individually, they're going to look to you, the leader, who's in charge, and what do we do? And I've seen that in all kinds of situations in the Marine Corps, especially where you have very well-trained junior leaders, people that are 20 years old with a lot of responsibility on their shoulders. Still, when you have situations where it's unclear which way to proceed, where there's conflicting signals, if you're the senior person, in the case senior Marine on the scene, you're going to notice these heads swivel over to look at you to tell them what needs to be done. Same for you. And a couple of things that you want to pay attention to is how long you're going to take to make a decision, how much additional information you need. What are your immediate physical reactions? Are you fidgety? Are you looking all over? Does your voice raise up? You have to pay attention to all those things. And there are times when you want to wait and gather more information, but that needs to be a conscious decision, not the default decision from you. Not saying, well, let's wait and see what happens. When you say that, you got to realize that is an immediate, like a negative, it's being received negatively in some way by your people because they want you to make a decision to go a certain direction. Again, it might be necessary to wait and gather more information, but you have to be aware of that. One of the ways people are going to look at that situation I just described as it pertains to you is that a passive leader is going to wait for the answer to come to them. And the hard part there for your team is they're the ones living life day after day until either that answer just makes itself apparent or you make a decision. So you want to really think of it as reducing the suffering, really, between situation and action. An example might be you're a sales manager and you have a customer that is having a tough time making a decision. The salespeople on your team are looking at for you to get involved on the phone and help change the situation or clarify the situation. You can talk about how urgent it is to increase sales, but unless you're doing things like that, reacting to uncertainty with action, you're going to lose people. And talking about how urgent things are and not acting toward that end result is an example of when your words and your actions don't match. And this is something that I think a lot of new leaders struggle with because you're not sure how much your title brings authority, but it doesn't bring the respect of people automatically. That takes time. And one of the ways you can shorten the amount of time that people start to really listen to you, respect what you say, and do what you say faster is when you demonstrate the things that you say are backed up by your personal action, or maybe not things that you do yourself, but follow up. Something I like to say is when you're setting goals for maybe yourself or your team is what can you do well every day? Because it's very important when you say you're going to do something, you have to do it. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly what you say, but if you say you're going to follow up on the statistics maybe for quality and you're going to do it weekly, when you miss a week, that's a big deal because you're showing people that you're not going to come back to it, which is an indirect signal for them that they don't have to pay as much attention to it. And what you'll notice over time is that when you don't come back to the things that you say you're going to do or you want the team to do, you start to get less ideas. And if not less in number, definitely less in quality because people just assume that it's never going to happen in the first place. And you want to have a balance between ideas, talking about things, and action. It's not all about action because if it's all about action, you may miss the great idea that somebody on the team has. You know, to create an environment where even the person that joined your team this week can contribute something, and they're not probably going to do that on their own. So you got to go after them and pull them into a conversation. Mike, I know you're new to the business, but what aren't we thinking about? What's your impression about the direction of the discussion we're having? And then you want to follow up every idea with some sort of feedback, even the smallest piece of feedback. That's a good idea. I'm not sure. I can't picture how it's going to fit right now, but let's track it and let's pay attention to that as we go through this. But if the team perceives from you that something that is said is going to be acted upon, you have to at least do something. And as time goes on, the pressure builds. And how you react to that pressure is another aspect of how you conduct yourself that people are watching very closely. One way to think about it is when things are going good, it's a lot harder to set an example for your team because you're really not under the pressure. The pressure is really what reveals your true character. I can remember a situation in Iraq where we were driving down a street and we were in contact and you couldn't really tell which direction from, but I had the radio handset in my hand. I remember specifically thinking you have to speak very calmly into the radio because if for no other reason, the people on the other end, they can't hear it. If you ever shouted into a cell phone, it's a little clearer than the radios that we had, but you just can't understand it for no other reason. It's a practical reason to do it. But the other reason to do it is you want to send out an unspoken signal that the situation is hand. So I remember saying specifically, we're taking what appears to be heavy fire and we're proceeding south on whatever road it was. And then the person on the other end, I think it was a battalion commander, said, hey, can you move east and link up with Echo Company, who was also in contact? And I said, I think we need to return to the base temporarily. Just probably not as calm as I just sounded just then, but kind of what I was trying to do. In contrast that with, there was somebody in the back of we had about 10 or 12 vehicles who was screaming into the handset. I knew what he was saying, but it was unintelligible. And it kind of freaked everybody out. I would imagine they could hear that. To be fair, they had a couple blown out tires, and I don't know if they were carrying the wounded guys or not, but they were worried about getting separated, which I would be worried about too. You just got to stay calm though. Remember what you've been taught, in that case, training, and really force yourself to stay calm. And it is possible to do that, because people will respond to your response to stress. They will mirror your emotions. There's something called emotional contagion. I'll summarize the topic by saying, and you probably have noticed this, when you get emotional, when you're talking to somebody or a group, maybe just say one person, and you notice yourself getting animated, and they start to do the same thing in their facial expressions. That's what we're talking about here. So your emotion is actually being mirrored by your audience. So in that the emotion is negative or panicked, your team's going to panic just a little bit, if not even more than you. Some leaders think it's okay to be excitable and loud and that kind of thing. And while there is a time for that, there is a time to be loud, we'll say. I've done that. The time for that is when people are just not doing what they know how to do, or there's kind of a lackadaisical attitude. It's not the normal, everyday, how we interact with people every day. And it's definitely not when external factors roll in and there's no time to a deliberate plan and you really need people's heads in the game. That's not time to do that. So keep that in mind. How you react to stress, people are going to mirror that. So if you want people to remain calm, then you have to be calm yourself. I think this is probably the most unconsidered but most impactful example of the 5, and that is what you tolerate is going to become the standard. I think a lot of people have probably heard that, but to really appreciate what that means is something else, and it's critical to leading a team. In essence, people will give you what you demand, or another way of saying it is they will also only give you what you allow. So you accept even the smallest infraction on an expectation, it's going to have an effect, and it's going to lower the standard little by little. Because, like I was saying, people are watching you very closely to see, and they're not thinking, what can I get away with? But it's just a human nature to conserve energy, conserve brain power. And if you're asking for 5 things to be done at a certain level, but 1 or 2 or 3 of the 5 are just not getting that much attention as the other 2, people are going to emphasize, they're going to de-emphasize the ones that are not getting as much attention. So give you an example. You say that you want project managers to give you an end of the week report, and you just want it to cover where the project financials are, where they are in schedule, and any issues that you're concerned with. And you mean it to be a very easy kind of 10-minute, maybe even just an email. And somebody does not send it to you on Friday. Now, you don't have to fire that person. You don't have to document it in their personal permanent record, at least not initially. But you at least need to ask them, hey, I didn't get your end of the week report. And really the reason is not that you want the information on those projects in that example. The reason is because you want them to know that you noticed they did not submit their report. Because if you don't do something like that, pretty soon you're not going to be seeing anything. And we all have gotten ourselves into situations like that where we say we want things from people and it falls off. And it probably falls off for one reason, is that you're not emphasizing it and interacting with the information that's coming your way. A good rule of thumb is that if you ask for information for somebody, you have to do something with it. You have to give them at least some small amount of feedback on the information itself, or else it's just going to taper off. And a lot of times we ask for too much information and we're not able to give that feedback, and things just kind of die off. We all do that. But the point is, you have to pay attention to the things that you're saying you need for people. A good way to summarize this standard that you set is what you tolerate is teaching people what to do faster than the things that you say. A lot of times we'll like to send out some email guidance, or we'll have a town hall meeting we'll talk about it. But it really comes down to when people need to act, do you act in concert with them and do your part in providing feedback? If you don't, it's just going to taper off. Pretty soon you'll have nothing. Which is a little bit tied to the fifth standard here, moral courage. And one of my favorite, there's a lot of good demonstrations of moral courage. There's talk a lot about in the military. The Marine Corps talked about it in training. Almost every class had something about it. But do you do what the situation requires from a integrity standpoint, or what is really the right thing to do? Several studies show that the number one quality people expect in their leaders is integrity. It may not be something that you think about every day, but it's very important to your people. And you have to just assume that, or if you're not convinced, you have to assume that. Moral courage is made up of humility and integrity. So humility, mature enough to admit when you don't know something. So like an example would be if you ask the team to do something, they feedback that they don't know exactly how to do that, and maybe you don't either. You don't kind of push that off to the side and just have them go find out what to do. You have to admit that, okay, well, this might be a little bit more complex than we were thinking, because I personally am not sure either. So let's let somebody on board. Let's pull up somebody in, an expert on the situation or the topic, and have them help us with it. So a lot of times leaders think that you have to be a know-it-all, or you have to be the best in all these different areas. But actually what you'll find is that if you can show a good sense of humility, people will react very positively toward that, because they don't want to work for somebody that knows everything or thinks they know everything anyway, because they don't know everything. And then, like I was saying at the beginning of the video, when trouble strikes and the situation is not clear in terms of what should be done, they're going to look to you. They're going to look to the person who is the formal leader of the group for direction. You may think people are just blowing you off 5 days a week or 7 days or however many days a week you work and don't listen to you and don't respect you. But sure enough, when a situation comes up that requires decisiveness, you're going to be looked at to provide that. So when you have a difficult situation to deal with, something that is ethically questionable, we'll say, or morally questionable, you cannot hide from that. You have to confront it. You don't have to have the answer right off the bat, but you have to stay involved. Good example might be a difficult situation with a client where you just can't agree on something. You can't just leave your people in the trenches there alone. You have to be in there with them, trying to negotiate some sort of conclusion to the situation. That's moral courage, is staying involved with something personally, even though it makes it harder for you, or maybe even make it risky for you if it doesn't work out. But if it's your responsibility, if that person is one of your direct reports or under your charge, you have to be there with them, no matter what's going on. That doesn't mean do their job for them. It just means be with them, support them. And if you do that, what you'll notice is your ability to inspire action in the future goes up. If you avoid it, people know, and then you're really not the leader anyway. Okay, now let's condense all of this into 3 principles. Principles should guide your decision-making in certain situations. First one is the example that you set is really a pattern, okay? So you can't show up on Monday really excited about something and think that that's setting the example. It's going to be what you do day after day. After consistency of your actions is what matters. Number 2, pay attention to how you behave under pressure, because that is an unspoken permission slip, if you will, on what others can do. You're showing people what an acceptable reaction is. And it's probably a good assumption that people will not exceed your level of calm. That's, I think, a good way of looking at it. And 3, the standard is something that you have to protect. Okay, not just a nice to have, a way to do work. It is something that you have to be really concerned with and personally involved with. And one of my battalion commanders told me years ago, The worst thing you can do is nothing. When there's a little bit of a infraction, it might be innocent enough. It might be that the person doesn't realize what's going on, but you have to at least mention it. And then 5 actions, things that you can take in and start working on immediately. Think about what people learn by watching you and just change one of those things that you know is a little bit off track. Number 2, something my dad always used to say, just do what you got to do, or do what you say you're going to do. If you have no intention of actually doing it, then just don't even say anything about it. Take a look at your standards, and your standards are everything that is written down that you say you want, or just maybe just the more informal things that you verbally have asked for, and get one of them back on track. Pick a learning area, look for opportunities to show your sense of humility, have people tell you some aspect of the job and moral courage. Pick one area, finance. Maybe you are very involved or impacted by finance in your business, but you don't know quite as much as you'd like to. That's a good example. Figure out a way to get paired up with the people that do know and work on that together. That's going to show others that it's okay if they don't know everything. And then 5, really watch for those pressure opportunities. I think that's the Billie Jean King quote at the U.S. Open as the tennis players walk out. The quote of "pressure is a privilege" is on the wall as they do before they get out on the court. I think that's a perfect quote. We try to avoid pressure, though, a lot of times. But you faced with those situations, don't look at it as a nuisance. Look at it as your opportunity to set the example yourself. And that's it. Hopefully this video gave you some things to think about, different ways to appreciate how we set an example maybe without realizing it and how important it really is. If these types of skills are something that you're working on with your team or maybe for yourself personally, love to help. My information's in the description. Until next time, lead from the front, set a good example, and you're going to notice a difference in the way your team responds to you and the work that they get done. Thanks.